Ms. Terry is next. After Ms. Terry, Mr. Whitley from the Contra Costa Council. After Mr. Whitley, Mr. Zuckerman. Ms. Terry.
Good afternoon, Melinda Terry with Central Valley Flood Control Association and North Delta Water Agency. I do sympathize with you wanting to get through your agenda today, but one of the downsides when we can only comment at the end is people like Mr. Nordoff and Gloria, often leave because they have flights to catch, and so I hope that when I get to the comments in response to Mr. Nordoff, that someone on the council will share it with him. But I wanted to talk about the Item 10, and first of all, just thank you for asking the Independent Science Board to look at the BDCP and the things that you have. I think it's very helpful to have other sets of eyes on it, and it was a good document. We, of course, were a little concerned with the stakeholder recommendation. And so, for instance, I don't go to the ISB meetings, and I think I will start, and then I can bug them and more than I bug you. But one of the things is, I don't know whether they looked at, for instance, of how different an HCP that this is than what is normally done. Normally, an HCP is done within the area, so you set aside lands to protect habitat so that you can develop in that area. This is a very, very unique HCP because it does not do that. The Delta carries the burden of setting aside everything for the habitat that's additional above ESA that you do in an HCP. But it also has all the facilities as well as the mitigation that has to be done for that. But all of the benefits accrue to another area. So that's one of the reasons, if you will, like a stakeholder group is so important, because we bear the burden but don't receive any of the benefits. But in addition to that, there are lots of things that will occur. I've tried to explain, Chair Eisenberg brought up the litigation issue, and so in the governance committee, one of the things I've brought up, because we've seen it in the Sacramento River restoration, for instance, is there are inevitably things that occur, like seepage is a big thing. When you look at the EIR, if you've read any of the EIR, see, we've got a 4-story dam going in, for instance, in the Delta right next to a community. All of these facilities are still being built in the same earthquake area that they claim their existing facilities are under. So it's just as susceptible. It'll have new engineering, which is good, but it's not foolproof, clearly. So we have a 750-acre 4-story dam. But usually when we get aquatic habitat, we experience the seepage on the islands next door. The Prospect Island was the good example last time it had water. And so on the litigation front, one of the things I've brought up in the governance is to avoid, because in the San Joaquin River restoration, that's what happened to those farmers. They got flooded out. What did they do? They sued. So I had suggested in the governance that you really build in a process and a entity within them that will hear these claims. And in talking to Roger Patterson, he said they've done that on other big projects. So that you have a process that if somebody is harmed by the projects, any of the 22 conservation measures, they have a place to go and say, here's my damage, and it gets either mitigated, fixed, paid for, whatever the thing, so that you can try and avoid, you're never going to avoid all the litigation, as we know. But it's an example, I think, where the governance could really be improved to try to at least reduce that once you're in an implementation phase. Because there are all kinds of things, like I said, we've got, if you look at the EIR, it's got trucks going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, from 6 to 10 years, just to pull out muck. That's just the tunnel portion. Doesn't account for any other construction at ER. 24 hours a day. Sacramento County is not an attainment area. There are huge, huge impacts that, whether it's to the county, to individuals, that will occur. And if there were a process to be able to go address those, I think that would be a good idea to figure that out ahead of time and not wait until, because otherwise just people have no option but to go sue. If we can avoid that, that would be great. The other thing is mitigation lands. Again, going back to how different of an HCP it is, we have 5 county HCPs that are being done. And again, the purpose of those, they set aside lands so they can do their development over a long period of time. Then we have this huge regional BDCP, HCP, that overlays that. And when you do that, there is very little land left over for the locals to be able to mitigate our projects. I represent the Central Valley Flood Control Association. And when we do levee improvements, we have to mitigate. We can't go outside of the Delta to mitigate. We have to mitigate within. But if it's already spoken for by others, there's nothing left for us. I've brought that up to them, that's the beauty of an HCP, if you will, is they could share that land with us to use for our mitigation as well, but so far all of the benefits are just accruing someplace else and they're not sharing them locally. But it's another example that, again, a stakeholder group, not only do we think we need a stakeholder group, but with more influence, as Supervisor Natoli said, because these are really, really big implementation issues that will occur. And if we think ahead, we can try to deal with them before that actually happens. Another issue that is a little bit concerning when you look at, and I forgot to bring up, I was going to read it, but I won't, but in the EIR, it talks about changing all the flow patterns and that it's going to reduce flows in Sutter, Steamboat, and Georgiana sloughs. Again, we have hundreds of ag intakes that if the water surface goes down, it may go down below those intakes. Suddenly, our water supply reliability is at risk. Again, rather than sue, I'd like an opportunity to be able to go and have those addressed and fixed. Another issue on governance is the authorized entity group. When you really look at it, it's, again, a unique HCP. And by virtue of the HCP permits and the water operations that will occur under that, we no longer really have a state water project. It's almost privatizing based on if you've got water contractors that get to be on the authorized entity group, suddenly it's privatizing almost the state water project in terms of how it could be run and decisions that get made. So that's just something to throw out there. As Dr. Merrill said, it's not final whether they're going to be on it, but in their current document, that's what's in there, is to have them be on the authorized entity group. The other thing I would mention is the BDCP may not ultimately qualify for state funding for the habitat portion of it. As you know, that's the other problem with this HCP that's really unusual is one measure is permittable, 21 measures are programmatic, so they'll require other permits and take longer to do and have different funding source. And the Delta Reform Act was very clear that there's 8 items that they have to have in their plan in order for you to, number 1, put it in the Delta plan, and number 2, for them to receive state funding. And one of them is a reasonable range of flow criteria, rates of diversion, and other operational criteria necessary for recovering the Delta ecosystem and restoring fisheries under a reasonable range of hydraulic conditions, which will identify the remaining water available for export and other beneficial uses. Now, I've read thousands of pages of both the EIR and the plan. And it's at least not clear to me that that's actually stated anywhere. The other thing that it says it's supposed to have out of that 8 is the potential effects on Sacramento River and San Joaquin River flood management. And again, we haven't seen a lot of hydraulics coming out of it. They focus a lot on the habitat. But these are clearly things that need to be there. They might be embedded, but it's not going to be clear. So to the extent you can encourage or help make sure that the things that are required, that it's going to be clear to all of us what those really are. And then on Mr. Nordhoff's comments, again, if you guys could share with him my response to him. He was bringing up, I think you both discussed the article about the Netherlands and their things, and he was saying it would be great if we were elevating our things. We actually do that. So if you're in a floodplain, FEMA requires that. It's the NFIP program, their National Flood Insurance Program, requires the counties to be the enforcers. And so that does, in fact, occur today, especially because the remapping that FEMA has done. So areas that weren't in flood areas really are now, and will have to comply with that, and the counties will all have to enforce that. Including, for instance, facilities of BCP. They're going to have to be raised up. So that does, in fact, occur, so I didn't want to let that go for people to think that that's not a requirement. It is, and in fact, the NFIP was just reauthorized by Congress last year, and the insurance rates are going to start going up this year, in case people didn't know. The other thing that he raised was the seismic risk of the current infrastructure, and that's the thing about the BDCP in particular, is that the seismic risk, the only thing they've analyzed is the levees of portraying these multi-levee failures, which we haven't even had one documented levee. But what they haven't looked at, again, is if you're looking at the system, their California aqueduct, and I don't know the name of the federal pipeline that goes down, or canal rather, they run along the San Andreas Fault. And that's been shown by recent studies that it's really vulnerable right now to a 7.0 or greater based on the pressure that they're seeing build up. They've got areas that have sunk over time. So there's other issues related to the San Andreas Fault. Parkfield area, which is part of the San Andreas, It has a 6.0 or greater every 12 to 32 years, so average of 22 years. Or the 50-year, the last one was 2004. So about 2025 or 2024, when this theoretically would be built and come online, is when the next big one there will happen. So they could have failures in other parts of their system. It's 700 miles long. That really hasn't been addressed, and it won't be under the BDCP because that's not. So I just wanted to raise that. And if somebody could share that, I'd appreciate it.
I'm going to start having to put time limits. I've got something like 15 requests to speak.
Okay.
Ms. Terry, I apologize.
Sure.
If you could wrap it up, please.
I guess I would just, I'd end with, I would encourage you to ask, the most recent work group meeting that we had was the finance group, where we had, the BDCP has agreed to do a cost-benefit analysis, and so I encourage you to invite them to come make a presentation on cost-benefit analysis so that you can hear about that. Concerning things that science people brought up in other areas is it does not have a peer review. And it's not clear that they're doing any uncertainty or sensitivity analyses, which are normally done in cost benefit. And right now it's unequal. It's not really analyzing any of the downsides to the delta. It only looks at the benefits to the exporters from what they've shown us. And most concerning, it has a provision in their scope of work that the DWR, Bureau, and water contractors can edit the cost-benefit analysis before it's released to the public, and it's not peer-reviewed. So, but I do encourage you to maybe have a presentation on that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Terry.